Good evening. I hope that you're seeing my screen. I want to apologize for all of the confusion. Unfortunately, because of the course copy, there was residual language on the course content with regards to this week. There was language that said this week was not an in-person week. It was going to be online asynchronous. That was a holdover from Dr. Acevedo. If you notice, the syllabus did not say that. And so I apologize that some of you got confused. For the sake of just making sure no one's left, not able to get to class, it is going to be just an online asynchronous class today. All you need to do is watch this recording, participate as you go along with this information, and then that will be counted as your attendance in class tonight. I will be available online from 6 until 7:30 to help if you have any questions or are still, excuse me, feeling confused. Tonight, we're going to talk about qualitative research. We're going to do a little bit of contrasting between quantitative and qualitative. Please do not assume that qualitative research does not use numerical data. Qualitative data may in fact use numerical data, but it is a different research approach than quantitative research. So for example, you may see numerical data in the form of 11 million children had trouble accessing foods, or 5 out of 12 teachers interviewed. That's numerical data. And it's similar to what you might see in quantitative research, but the goal of the research is drastically different between quantitative and qualitative. And so I just wanted to kind of get us all in a mindset that we're not thinking about the fact that qualitative research is the absence of quantitative or numerical data, but it's the approach in and of itself is focusing on understanding context and specificity versus the design itself aligning with a quantitative study that is likely much more post-positivism. So, as you've been reading your research, you may be reading quantitative research, you may be reading qualitative research, and you may be noticing that the words you see across those two types of research are different. So in quantitative research, you often see words like experiment, hypothesis, correlation, statistics, control group, or maybe even measurement. In qualitative research, you're going to have different words. You're going to be, instead of perhaps reading about the variables, you might be reading people's stories. You might be understanding images or hearing what happened during observations. Regardless of which research approach you employ, both research methodologies are scientific methods. They start with a research question, they move in a systematic way to investigate, but the goal of the investigation is often very different in quantitative versus qualitative. As a point of kind of going back to several weeks ago when we were together in class and we were talking about post-positivism, positivism, critical theory, constructivism, we talked about ontology, epistemology, and maybe even the methodologies used in those approaches. I knew there was a table that I had that might be helpful to all of you. And so you can see here this basic table that takes the paradigms and talks to you about the differences between each of these four paradigms in terms of their ontology, their epistemology, their methodology. It continues, that particular document actually continues to present for you how each of these views knowledge, how they approach ethics, how they approach training. And then it really, I think, does a nice job of helping you to understand some differences. So I'm going to switch my screen share and I'm going to show you in Blackboard where you can find this complete document. So if you are in Blackboard and you go under course content into the class PowerPoints, you will see that I added this document paradigms. And it's a PDF, table 6.1 and 6.2. Okay. And in 6.1, it talks about basic ontology, epistemology, and methodology. But as you move into table 6.2, it talks about some specific issues and aims of the research. So if you are engaging in positivist research, your inquiry aims to explain, predict, and control. Once you move into critical theory and constructivism, you're trying to move to critique, transform, refute, free, or in constructivism, understand or reconstruct. So I'm hoping that if you look at this idea of how they view the nature of knowledge, okay, it can be verified. It has facts or laws that can be proven or shown versus it's highly individual and it coalesces around consensus. The most bonding concept you're going to get under constructivism is reaching consensus amongst a group of folks who are quite similar. It continues to talk about the voice in terms of whose voice is presented. It also looks at power, okay? And how you are trying to work through that particular approach. Now, as you move into table 6.3 or 6.4, it has an element of repeated information, ontology, epistemology, and methodology, but you're going to see they've added in an additional area of research, and they've moved from just positivism, post-positivism, critical theory, and constructivism, and they've instead added into this participatory action research. So I'm hoping that through all of these tables, if you look at them, they will help you understand the differences between positivism, constructivism, um, critical theory, um, this idea of participatory. As you read through these descriptors, if certain ones resonate more with you, you might circle them and then look to see where you find yourself centering. Also, you may identify one way, but what's the goal of your research? Okay. If your research is not trying to be transformative, if it's not trying to redistribute power, it it you may in your everyday life take a very critical stance on the world, but your research may not. Your research may be far more participatory or constructivist. So again, this is just an optional resource to help you. I promised I would try and get that for you. I hope it is helpful. And I will plan to bring some copies for you all to class next week. So with that, let's jump back to this idea of qualitative research. Now, the slides previously, we were looking at a host of paradigms. The table that I gave you as an elective one brings in, as an additional paradigm, participatory. There is not a column for the interpretivist paradigm, okay? But when you think about the paradigms that are rooted in interpretivism, you see constructivism, the transformative critical theory, postmodernism, and pragmatism. All of these paradigms are rooted in or grounded in interpretivism. And interpretivism is trying to understand how knowledge and reality are constructed. And you are part of the study. You cannot be objective. You cannot isolate yourself from the study itself. You cannot remove yourself wholly. You are part of this cycle that is transpiring down here. As you think about qualitative research as a whole, an interpretivist research is a type of qualitative research. It, as I said before, it is scientific, it is systematic, but it's trying to interpret textual information. And by text, we don't mean just the written text, we mean contextual information. It is just as rigorous, it is just as thoughtful, strategic, and systematic as quantitative research. But the goal is very different. The goal is around detailed information about a smaller population. And what you're working to attempt to do is to describe the process, the setting, or commonalities. But what you are not trying to do is to try and prove a truth that applies to everyone. Typically, qualitative research transpires in more naturalistic settings. That's the preferred type of setting that it would occur in. And if you were engaging in qualitative research with children, it would need to be emotionally significant to the child. Now, again, some of these are specific to researching in early childhood. But qualitative research happens across contexts, even in contexts that do not have children involved in them. In quantitative research, oftentimes the goal of quantitative research is to make sure that you have that random selection so that you are pulling people from all of the possible groups to get full representation. But in qualitative research, you're very purposeful about who you select and why you select them. All right, everyone. I apologize. I thought I had paused the recording to take the phone call from my daughter, but I apparently just paused the screen share. So at any rate, I will post a message at the beginning of this for you to watch that you can just hop over. And then let's see here. Let's hop back to where we were. I'm going to go ahead and screen share and get you into the PowerPoint. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between qualitative research and what is emphasized in qualitative research. Overall, qualitative research seeks to be an interpretivist framework. The process you follow is as important as anything you find out. There are two types of reasoning, inductive and deductive. One moves inward, one moves outward. Qualitative research is highly inductive in the type of research that is being done. It does not try to generalize or replicate findings as happens in quantitative research. It is instead trying to talk very specific about a particular context and a particular experience that a person might be having, a situation, and it's trying to give you that information in greater detail. Now, there is a research study by Dr. Garcia Alvarado that you all have access to be able to read as an example of qualitative research. In particular, it's collecting data with both children and parents. And so you can see many of these things demonstrated in that research study. And this was done by our very own Dr. Garcia Alvarado. Now, if you remember when we talked about positivism and we talked about ontology, epistemology, axiology, positivists are seeking to reveal the absolute reality. They believe in a singular objective reality. Interpretivists recognize that it's far more subjective to that. We can all look at the exact same tree, but to one person, they may see nature, another might see food, and a third may see a way to earn money. And our experiences, everything that's happened to us thus far affects how we interpret the situation. So simply describing the objective reality is insufficient. What we need to understand is how the participants, not the subjects, the participants are interpreting that situation. So if you look at this picture, think for just a second, what is shown in that picture? It's actually a close-up of a turtle. And some of you may have gotten that, some of you may not have. In this picture, what do you see? Do you see ice cream? How about this one? It's a little more difficult. What do you see in this one? It's a bolt. And so the objective reality is what we see in this picture, but we're each interpreting them differently. So looking at this image, what does it remind you of? The pastel colors, the crochet, I think babies, which is timely given the phone call that our class recording was interrupted with. How about this one? The objective reality might be that it's a candle, but what does the candle mean to you? For some of us, it might remind us of a birthday. It might remind us of a holiday where we light candles. There are lots of things that it may remind us of. It might even be a childhood experience where the power went out and you had to use candles as a source of light. How about this one? This one probably evokes a little more emotion in many of us. Our positionality determines what we see in these images or what we think when we have certain experiences. And so I want to spend just a minute and let's kind of dissect this idea of positionality a little bit more. You will perceive things or not perceive things. You will process things in a certain way based on your positionality. Scientifically, we know that our brain is selective about the things we see, hear, and process because there's far too much coming at us in any given moment for us to be able to process all of it. But based on our physical abilities, our age, our sexual orientation, identity, our ethnicity, our race, our gender, and all of these subcategories around that, and this is not an exhaustive list, but it's trying to give you a good example, you will see some things or not see some things. So let's take, for example, if somebody has had military experience, they have been trained to identify danger in a way someone growing up in a very safe rural community may not. They may perceive someone concealing a weapon that someone else may not, because they know what concealed weapons look like. So when we think about our positionality in broad categories and how it's informed by all of these factors and many more, it will shape what we see and hear in the research that we're conducting. And so as a researcher, as a qualitative researcher, you cannot be purely objective because your conscious and unconscious biases, your assumptions, they will shape what you're looking at, what you're hearing in that person's words, and what you're even able to see physically in artifacts. So you need to understand how your positionality will shape the research paradigm that you approach your work from, the actual design of the research methods and the methodology. When you're analyzing and presenting findings, your positionality will affect all of these aspects of the research. And so you have to know your own positionality and you have to engage with it and be highly reflexive. And that's different than reflective. So when you think about your study design, your data collection, your analyses, your positionality is shaping all of them. And if you want to engage in a good study and be able to mitigate the influences of your own subjectivity, they have to be as visible to you as possible. And so we're going to have you think for a minute. I want you just to kind of go back to this slide. And I want you to look at each of these categories and think about how your past work experience, how your physical appearance, how your marital status, your parental status, your thinking styles, all of these things might influence what you do and do not see, what you want to research, how it influences you in a variety of ways. All right. Hopefully, you found that productive to take a few minutes and to take a look at how all of these things might be affecting you as a researcher. Okay. When you think of quantitative research, you actually are trying to eliminate as many of the influences of the researcher as you possibly can. Really thinking about validity and reliability by manipulating variables. You are in all of those aspects, removing the researcher and the influence of the researcher as much as possible. But in qualitative, the way that you are trying to reduce the influence of the researcher is by presenting a fairly detailed and extremely rigorous self-reflection on the research process. It can be done anywhere in the final report, but it's typically included in your final report. When someone does a thesis, they may in their chapter 2 include a careful and detailed explanation of their positionality, how it affected the research, and then also how you've controlled for as many of those things as you possibly can, or engaged in methods that will help make sure that you're getting the perspectives accurately. Now, in quantitative research, we talked about the notions of validity and reliability. Validity is how well what is being measured is actually being measured. Reliability has to do with the replication of the research. And so they are very different concepts. When you think about a research study, that is a quantitative study that is attempting to understand if mothers with twins have a higher level of stress than mothers with single babies. Validity would have to do with the fact that they're actually measuring the stress in the mothers and not that they're accidentally measuring something like marital satisfaction or the baby's health or anything else. Validity is saying, are they measuring what they meant to be measuring? Reliability means that based on the research methods being conducted, you would get the same findings every single time that you did that the findings are reliable, that they would keep happening over and over and over again. So, for example, if I took a random sampling of mothers with twins and I had a valid study, meaning that I was actually measuring their stress levels, and I found out that 90% of mothers of twins had a higher stress rate than mothers of single babies. Then, if it were reliable, I could take a completely different random sample of mothers of twins and I would get the same almost 90% in that study. They they are related in that if you don't have validity, your reliability will be thrown off. If you're not measuring what you mean to be measuring, you're going to get unreliable results. But you could have a very reliable study that is not valid because you're getting the same findings for that other factor. For example, let's say fatigue in mothers versus stress. Those are two different things, although they're related. Or, for example, the baby's health. And you'd get the same results over and over and over again, but it's not valid. What you meant to be measuring was stress, and that's not what you're measuring. So again, validity and reliability are concepts in quantitative research, but in qualitative research, you're not striving for validity or reliability. Instead, you are striving for trust or trustworthiness. And we're going to talk more about that later. I want you to go ahead and pause the recording, and I want you to take 10 minutes to think about your research question and your own positionality to that research question. So on a piece of paper, write down your research question where it stands right now, or in a Word document, type out your research question as it stands right now. And then you're going to go back and look at assumptions that you might have, experiences that you might have that would have shaped or led to implicit or explicit biases that factor into your research in particular. Now, this is what you're going to turn into me tonight as proof of attendance at class. You can take a photograph of what you wrote on paper if you're choosing to do paper. If you're doing a Word document, you can turn it in Word document form. But I'm going to roll us back to the prior screen where you have all of these things to think through. And this time, when you think through how they've shaped you and the way you think, you're not just doing it in general like you did a few minutes ago, but you're actually framing it with your research question. So, for example, if my research question is trying to understand families' willingness to engage in school special events, I need to think about how each of these factors might be affecting my positionality. Does my age affect my positionality? Does my physical abilities affect my positionality? How does my race or ethnicity? Also, when you think about some of these subcategories, my economic status. And this would be an example where if I have always come from a comfortable socioeconomic status where I could take the day off of work to go be at a family engagement event, that might be framing how I approach my research and thinking about why families don't come. It would be very different if I came from a socioeconomic status where I worked two jobs and I wasn't sure how I could add one more thing into my day. So again, what you're going to do is you're going to take a piece of paper or open a Word document and write your research topic or question as it stands right now at the top. Then you're going to go through and spend 10 minutes thinking about your assumptions or implicit and explicit biases related to you as a researcher. I'm going to leave the screen here so that you can use these to kind of help fuel your thinking. And then in 10 minutes, go ahead and restart the recording. All right, I hope that you have taken your 10 minutes to write down about your own positionality. Again, please post that in Blackboard. I will get you a special space for you to add that. I want you to think about in the previous slide, before you did your reflection, we talked about in quantitative research the use of validity and reliability as a way to have for people to have confidence in your research. In qualitative research, we're not striving for validity and reliability. We're working to develop or demonstrate trustworthiness. And sometimes researchers will use something called triangulation in research in order to build that trustworthiness. But triangulation is not the only way that we build trustworthiness in qualitative research. So again, you're not going to use the word validity or reliability if you're engaging in qualitative research. Instead, what you're trying to do is have your reader understand and develop trustworthiness in your research approach and your ability to demonstrate the findings associated with your research. So there are some different ways that you can create triangulation. It might be between videos, observations, and materials. It might be between photographs, interviews, and materials. There is no set rule of between what you will triangulate, but you not only could triangulate against or across types of information, but you also could triangulate based on differing factors, more or less experience of one individual or another. You could go with different age ranges. You could look at public people versus private people. I know I've mentioned before that in the Jeffrey Trawick Smith article that you read in the play class, he talks about his triangulation, and he did it between his observations, some videos, and some interviews with the teachers. So he, as a researcher, might have had a different perspective than the teachers would have. So again, this idea of triangulation can happen in a variety of ways. It can also happen in the analysis using different roles or different reviewers trying to make sure that they all come to the same conclusion. So as you're doing your GRP or thesis, this is one type of triangulation that can happen, is that I, as the instructor, can be someone who looks at your data and analyzes it and triangulate with you that we both come to the same findings. It's not that we're trying to seek consensus, okay? But we're trying to understand it from multiple perspectives when you're doing analysis triangulation and make sure that the data is being fully seen. There's also theory and perspective triangulation, where you could use multiple theoretical perspectives to analyze and interpret the data. An example that Dr. Acevedo uses is critical race theory, post-colonial theory. She uses these two theories to examine picture books with Puerto Rican themes. And so they're two different perspectives, theoretical perspectives, but when they look at the same data, they draw out different information. And so again, triangulation might be looking for consistency of findings when it's within the methods Okay. However, when it's in the analysis, we aren't trying to find consensus or an agreement on one thing, but to actually look at it from multiple and different ways. Now, there are a variety of qualitative approaches, including action research, which is what you are doing, ethnography, which was demonstrated in the Jeffrey Trawick Smith article that you read in the play class. There are case studies. So, for example, I'm currently doing a case study with Dr. Burgard, where we are doing photo elicitation with family members to understand their experience doing family engagement with a particular school. You can engage in observation, you can do interviews, but these can also be methods that are used within other research approaches. So again, research approaches and methods, but across all research, you will often find commonality in what they present. If you look at the Garcia Alvarado article, the research question that they were trying to answer was, what does retelling a culturally relevant book reveal about Mexican American preschoolers' retelling and communication skills? All right. So the participant group was two 4-year-old preschool children in a Spanish English dual language classroom. So when you look at the number of participants, it was 2. And that's very appropriate in qualitative research. In quantitative research, you couldn't get validity and reliability with 2 participants. But in qualitative research, you're not trying to do that. You're trying to understand from a very different perspective. Their data collection included observation, field notes, a student interest inventory, parent interviews, video recordings, and audio recordings. It took 11 weeks. They did read alouds on Mondays through Thursday and the retelling on Fridays. And here's what they found: that children are co-constructing zones of proximal development, and that they're appropriating vocabulary to be able to retell a culturally relevant story. When you look at qualitative and quantitative research as a whole, qualitative research and quantitative research have very different goals. They have a very different way of working with the data. They present the findings differently, and they approach their work from different frameworks or paradigms, whether it's positivist or interpretivist. And within the middle, each of them represent empirical research, which is collecting the data, not just reading about something or doing secondary data analysis. They are each informed by a theoretical framework, but that theoretical framework is either interpretivist, for example, could be constructivist, could be critical, or it operates from a positivist framework. It follows the research process. It has a systematic observation, but how those observations are done are very differently. And the ethics involved are distinct, but they're both informed by ethical behavior. So they are different. One is not better than the other, but they attempt to do different things and they produce different things. So you need to think about what you want to accomplish in your research and whether a quantitative or a qualitative action research study might be more appropriate. So That is your qualitative research summary in a nutshell. I want you to make sure you turn in your reflexive response so that you can get credit for attending tonight. And looking forward, don't forget that you have an assignment you need to do about perspectives. And what I want you to do in that assignment is basically think about an event that you and someone else experienced or that you shared with someone else. It could be going out to dinner with friends. I want you to sit down first and write one full page describing the event from your perspective. And then after you've done that, you need to interview someone else who was participant in the event, asking them to talk about that exact same event. You're not going to suggest their answers, but you can ask questions like, what do you remember about that night? What stood out to you? Can you tell me what happened? What was going through your mind during that evening? I want you to audio record it and I want you to transcribe it. Transcribe means turning the spoken word into a written transcript. Okay? Then, using the transcription, I want you to write about the event from their perspective. You wrote about it from your own perspective first, and now you're going to turn the tables and write about it from their perspective based on what they told you about the event when you interviewed them. I want you to then please think about both accounts of the same event, both stories. What do you notice? What's similar? What's dissimilar? Go through each of these prompts and think about that and briefly write down what you noticed. In the end, you're going to have a 3-page document. One page is your retelling of the event, one page is their retelling, the third page is the reflections. And we're going to talk about this in class next week, so please make sure that you do that. It could be fun. If you want to treat yourself on Friday night, go do something with someone else with the understanding that this is going to be part of the activity or the event. So if you have questions, I will be online tonight from 6 until 7:30. You can pop into the chat room and I will be happy to help you out with any questions that you might have. Have a great evening. Again, my apologies for the fact that in the middle of this recording, you got my phone call with my daughter, as well as the fact that hopefully you don't mind that we moved class tonight to online asynchronous because of the confusion in the syllabus. Have a great evening.